Cognitive science needs to include religious studies, and if we don't understand it carefully and seriously, we are necessarily misunderstanding human cognition. There are truths that are available to you only after you undergo transformation. Science presupposes that when I make better sense, I will have gotten to the more real. What argument could you give me for that? You can't give me, because any argument presupposes it. This is Spinoza's great point. Truth is its own standard. What I saw in Plotinus was somebody that was doing the synoptic integration I was pursuing in cognitive science. He was taking Socratic presence, Platonic spirituality, Stoic ethics, and Aristotelian science, Pythagorean ideas about intelligibility, and integrating it all together like it's the grand unified field theory of ancient philosophy. Neoplatonism phenomenologically opens me so that nothing is excluded, and Zen empties me so nothing is enclosed. And they both lead me into pure non-duality, pure relationality.
What is God?
God is
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Vervaeke podcast. And as you can see, today I have John Vervaeke. John is a very special guest for many reasons. He was already on the podcast, which is very rare. And that was over almost half a decade at this point, very long time ago. And he was massively influential in my own thinking. His lectures, The Meaning Crisis, which eventually were transformed into a book, were absolutely pivotal for me in many ways, personally and intellectually. And also, John has had a massive impact in a lot of the fields that I'm interested in, and that I'm trying to also continue that line of work and push it in a positive direction. So I'm very pleased to finally be able to meet him in person and have another conversation. He's also a supervisor of my PhD, loosely around philosophy of psychedelics, even though it branches into many other topics. So I've had the privilege, the great privilege of being mentored by him, and I've learned a ton. And so, yeah, just really looking forward to it. I really appreciate all your work and also all the guidance that you've given me so far. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, thank you, Diego. You're an excellent student, very excellent student.
All right, so I think this is the only podcast where I'm going to skip the introduction, just because you've been here already, and also you're quite famous nowadays. Although you weren't as famous when I first discovered you. I discovered you when, in the little talk that you had with Peterson about meaning of life, way before the meaning crisis. Yeah. So it's quite funny how much you've grown, which is completely deserved. I'm very, very positive that this happened. A place that I would like to start is that something that always fascinated me about your work is how interdisciplinary it was. Like, I've always had this fight a little bit through my own learning, through my philosophical journey, where people really like to keep all these camps separate. And I loved science, but I also love philosophy, but they really don't like each other a lot of the time. Now that's changing a little bit, I think, but still there's a lot of friction. I remember, for example, when I was doing my undergrads in philosophy, always trying to sneak a little bit of cognitive science at a time from what I was learning in the meaning crisis. And professors really didn't like that. It's like, this is philosophy. Like, don't just randomly bring in papers of cognitive science. I was always very annoyed by that. And also, my undergrad was both philosophy and psychology. Mm-hmm. And when I was doing the opposite, people also didn't like it, right? Like, when it was a bit more philosophical within psychology, people said, you can't do that here. But I was like, that makes no sense, right? Like, reality is about all of this. Like, you can't just section things up. So this is something that has deeply inspired me. So I'm curious about, how have you approached this in your own life, in your own intellectual work? Why do you see this as being so valuable? And why do you think there's so much pushback, and what we can do about this?
Great question. Part of it is I have sort of, I guess you call it a philosophical, methodological response. And then there's more sort of a personal existential. I'll start with the first. I have a particularly what I call a strong vision of cognitive science because I think I understand why the disciplines do what they do. Specialization affords shared language, it affords shared expertise. It's easier to criticize each other if we have shared expertise, shared language. I know what you're talking about. I know what I can expect. But the problem, so there's a great benefit. I don't think we should stop having specialists. But the problem with that is that each one of these disciplines studies the mind. I often use the metaphor or the analogy, I guess. It's like going to a different country. So the neuroscientist studies the mind by studying the brain and uses fMRIs and EEG. And then the machine learning person says, no, 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 we're talking about intelligence. We have to look at algorithms and so forth. And then the psychologist says, what are you talking about? We're talking about experience and behavior. We need to run experiments and do statistical analysis. And the linguist says, what are you talking about? Right? What makes us unique and different is our language use. And we need to study grammars and transformational structures. And then the anthropologist goes, what? No, mind is how we belong. We're cultural beings. What's important about our mental lives is that we participate in culture. And then the philosopher goes, what are you talking about? Mind and consciousness. These are phenomenological, ontological realities that we have to fundamentally understand within, a comprehensive naturalistic framework. And each one of them is like a different country speaking a different language, using different tools. And the problem with that is it's highly, highly improbable. I think it's implausible that these levels of reality, the brain level, the algorithmic level, the behavioral level, the linguistic, cultural, ontological, don't impact each other or causally influence each other. And so what it does is you're missing all of that causal interaction, mutual constraint. You can fall prey to equivocation because you're using the word mind in all of these different senses that aren't properly related to each other. So people often slide. My pet peeve is people will slide from information in a purely technical probabilistic sense to a semantic sense without paying attention to their flipping from one level of analysis to another without properly trying to explain the relationship. It leaves us fragmented. And so the equivocation, the fragmentation, the lack of concern, attention to all of these causal influences, to my mind, gives us at least a very potentially distorting view of the mind. And that's problematic from a personal existential standpoint, because if we're in a period where people are trying to fundamentally question who and what they are and what meaning is, and these are mental ideas, then if they turn to the sciences and the humanities and they get this jabber, right, it's made worse for them, not better. And so I'm often aghast when I hear popular culture, journalism trying to talk about any of this stuff, because the fragmentation, the equivocation, the lack of concern for the causal interaction are all missing. And it exacerbates things. Even more personally, I've never really belonged in any one place. I'm kind of a perpetual pilgrim. And so I think that's valuable in the end. I mean, you have formal arguments like no free lunch theorem and bias variance saying no one method, no one practice is a panacea. Like there is no universal methodology, right? So I've, I mean, and this has cost me, but I've never felt that at home. What's been happening for me is I've met more and more people because of Awakening from the Meaning of the Crisis that are these interdisciplinary pilgrims. And I actually am coming to believe that they have an important role right now, because I think this talking across disciplines, even across worldviews, across, you know, faith and religious traditions, is what is most important for how we are, I think, trying to craft a more comprehensive response and orientation to the meaning crisis.
Yeah, that's a It's a great answer, and I really love. It's kind of like how you set it up in the beginning with kind of all these different fields. That's really funny and really encapsulates really well, and also really empathize with kind of the pilgrim kind of aspect to it. That's actually something that wasn't how I originally framed it to myself, but now that you've kind of articulated, I also see that a lot by myself as well. It's not only the fact that reality isn't segmented in this way, but also it's kind of like the personal connection to these fields, and something that I notice a lot. I don't know if it's the same with you, but like I love religion, or I love psychology, I love all of that. But something that often happens is that when I'm reading like only one field, like I get tired of it. Like I love philosophy, but like when I'm reading really heavy philosophy, like at one point I was like reading Heidegger a lot, and I'm like I'm tired of philosophy. Like I just need some like neuroscience or whatever. Yeah. Then I'm reading some like I'm tired of all this brain to like give me some actual spiritual nourishment.
Yeah.
That I always kind of like switch between them.
The original meaning of we have this word theory. The original meaning of theoria it was not theory. It's not even what some people understand contemplation. That's true. That's an older meaning. But the oldest meaning of theoria is pilgrimage, to actually go and Charles Taylor has this idea that you have to fundamentally leave a perspective in order to see the ways in which the perspective is potentially deceiving you, misleading you, blinding you to goals you don't yet have or interests you don't yet have. And so that's what you do on pilgrimage. You go to one place and you look back and you go, oh, I didn't realize. And so for me, as I pass from one discipline to the other, each discipline helps me see the sort of parochial perspective of the other, of the discipline I left. So as I move, I go back, oh, that's what's wrong with philosophy. Or, oh, that's what's missing from psychology.
We both kind of operate very, very widely because of all these reasons that you mentioned. But has there ever been a situation where you felt like you got deeper into a topic, but you didn't get as much out of that? Because, for example, something in my own life, I'm sure this depends on a lot of things. It's just my own little personal bubble. But for example, especially now, after I'm getting like deeper on my PhD, I look back at my master's, which is in neuroscience, and I like neuroscience, but I still feel like that was a massive waste of time. Like I learned things from it, but not to the point where it justified the commitment that I was making. So I'm just curious if anything remotely like this happened to you, where obviously breadth is very important, but then you kind of like went deeper and it's like actually this is not as relevant as I thought it was.
So yeah, there's kind of a sweet spot between the depth and the breadth. I mean, so you're going to be a good cognitive scientist. You've got to get some very deep training in a couple of the home disciplines. So I mean, I went to university for like 17 years to try and get enough of the educate. You have to do both. You have to go like deep in 2 or 3 disciplines, and then you have to do the breadth of integrating them. And so I think I've sort of, after a lot of wandering, which maybe overlaps with what you're talking about, where I was like, I don't know if that was worth it. And I feel like I'm closer to that sweet spot. But I've also, or now I'll just sound like the old guy. I'm young. Nothing's ever lost. Stuff I thought, right? Stuff I'd learned like 15 years ago. What was that for? Will suddenly become relevant in ways that I had not foreseen. I was really privileged to take the ecological approach to visual perception by J.J. Gibson with one of his greatest proteges, John Kennedy. And I really appreciated John and the argument he made, but that whole approach, it's sort of like, at that time, I was a deep student of Fodor, and I was like, what is this? Like this ecological stuff. And now I am so grateful that I did that. I'll be reading one of Julian's Kiverstein's paper, and he argues we gotta integrate an activism with the ecological approach to perception. And I go, oh my goodness, that's brilliant. And the notion of affordances came back, and it was like, oh, and the connection to relevance realization. So I've come to value that Jungian, nothing's ever lost. Again, you don't know how things are going to be repurposed, how they're going to turn out to be relevant. That's part of the frame problem. And so in one way, as I get older, there's more and more I regret, because all the ways I've been foolish or vicious or stupid or unkind. But in other ways, a lot of stuff I don't regret having done now, because it comes back in this way that I didn't. It's like a gift. It's like, oh, wow. And so it's sort of both for me.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so since we've been talking about kind of this interdisciplinary approach, obviously your work fits very much into that. And I know that you've recently gave a talk about why cognitive science needs religion or something along those lines. So
Yeah.
obviously very much within the theme of
Yep.
interdisciplinary work.
I'm still getting that file for you. They promised to get it to me very soon. I'll get it to you very soon.
Okay, no worries. Yeah, but I'm looking forward to that. But that's a very clear example of this type of work. Obviously, there is a branch of religion in cognitive science of religion.
Well, at least first generation, of which I've become very critical, yes.
Exactly. So that was also something that kind of pulled me a little bit away from cognitive science in the beginning, because I was very much interested in the questions of religion, especially when I was very young, like when I was first getting this book. It was more about like arguments about religion.
Well, I mean, I'll be harsher than you are. You're being kinder. I mean, a lot of it was trying to explain away religion and by explaining the irrationality of people who are religious, which I have so many criticisms of its understanding of both religion and rationality, and of cognition. So I have sort of three ways in which I'm deeply critical of that. I didn't pay attention to that literature very much. I looked at it and was like, I would read some of this literature. I mean, there's good published stuff on this. I'll give credit to other people, but like I've read so many devastating critiques of the hyperactive agency detector. Like, look, here's what it doesn't explain in terms of the functionality, the phenomenology, where we see religion showing up, the kind of context. It's just no, right? Does it play a role? Maybe, right? So I got to the point where I was like, nah, I'm going to just sort of go another way. I'm going to try and work my way to the sacred through for ecog sci.
Yeah, that was a lot of my reaction as well. And something that always bothered me as well is like I feel like it never made justice to like the actual lived life of a deeply religious person. It's like they never met anyone religious and tried to actually put themselves in the first person of what is the worldview of this person. It's more like I'm in this it reminds me a lot of this kind of like stupid colonial anthropological approach. It's like I'm going to visit this culture. They do some weird. They're just these primitive.
It's a missionary mentality, right? I have the knowledge, and you're the silly savage. And I don't attribute that to me. I'm being that person, right? I have the knowledge, and you're the silly savage, and I'm going to bring you the truth and disillusion you. And it's like, what? So there's that, and then there's also the pretense that the cognitive processes at work in religion might not also be at work in a naturalistic metaphysics that is often merely assumed, never reflected upon or even defended by the scientific attitude. And so I found it both performative contradiction, I found it imperialistic, like you say, and it was like, you're the aberrant person, the person without religion, right? And could you exercise a bit of epistemic humility and consider, right, if you want to explain cognition, shouldn't you do a better cross-sectional, right, multi-demographic kind of approach to the phenomenon like you do with everything else? You're really concerned about individual differences about ADHD or about the confirmation bias, but you have no concern about that when you're talking about something like religious behavior and experience. That struck me as just, it bordered on being hypocritical.
Right.
So sorry, I am very harsh about this. I gave that talk, and I basically made the argument, cognitive science needs to include religious studies because religion is a major, and you can't cleanly separate religious cognition from any other cognition, right? And then the model of religion that cognitive science has used, like in first generation, is this empirical, essentialist, categorical. Every religion is sort of pure and partitioned off, right? And it's pristine and permanent, which is all just empirically false, right? And so we got to include religious, because we have to talk about religious cognition, and we had to talk religion in the right way, right? I don't want to out anybody. I'll just say somebody that was in the audience and was a cognitive scientist. They came to me and they said, I sort of always thought of religion as sort of a genetic defect, but you made me realize something important might be going on there. And I thought, good. But I want to congratulate the person. I mean, obviously, I'm setting them up for a bit of a, something you're hitting with a stick or something. But I thought it was a defect or a cognitive defect or something like that. It's like, wow. I'm hoping that the kind of work we're doing will lead more people to that realization that this is a fundamental and perhaps even central aspect of human cognition and experience and behavior. And if we don't understand it carefully and seriously, we are necessarily misunderstanding human cognition and experience and behavior.
Yeah. What's so crazy to me about this little interaction that you had is, number one, like the stance itself is just crazy. Like it's absolutely crazy. But what's more crazy about that is how normalized that is.
Yes.
Like you're very outraged, but like within his bubble, like within his peers, very likely many people think that's a completely reasonable thing to do or to think. And I can view this even in myself, right? Like, before this book, before encountering much of your work, I would have thought the same way. I wouldn't have put it in genetic terms, but I would have put it in cognitive terms. It's like you just have a flaw, like in your brain, like you're not seeing reality correctly, like you're just deeply misguided.
Let me make one connection, just it might be helpful to people. Panamanel, in Circling the Elephant, gives an account of, he basically argues against that colonialist notion of religion. He said we should talk about how people come to find their experience or behavior religious, following Tave's work on religious experience reconsidered. But then he goes through this and he says, well, what I want to talk about it is like as a comprehensive orientation, right, that structures your fundamental sense of how you make sense of things. And then if you think about earlier, right, each science is its own little thing, and there's what's missing because of that dismissive attitude. Okay, maybe you're not religions in the sense of belonging to Christianity or Buddhism or whatever, but given that earlier argument about fragmentation and equivocation, you need a comprehensive orientation that tells you more basically not how do you make neuroscientific meaning or AI meaning or what's the meaning making and how does it work and how does it orient you to all of these so you can grasp the deeper reality running through them all. Well, now you're starting to shade into the very phenomena that people are often seeking when they're seeking a religious worldview. They're seeking a comprehensive orientation that tells them, not in this domain or that domain, but comprehensively, how do I make meaning and how do I bridge between these different meaning-making systems? That's Clifford Geertz's argument for what the religious function is. It's this meta-meaning function.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. And it's exactly how I think about it as well. So given this, and also given kind of like the wrong approach that we saw from kind of like the first generation of cognitive science of religion, how do you view like a mature, a justifiable cognitive science of religion in the future? So it's like if you try to imagine, 20 or 30 years down the line, you walk into a cognitive science department, there's some people doing cognitive science of religion. I'm curious, like, what do you think that will be, or what do you think it should be? And then also, how would that translate into empirical evidence? Like, what kind of work do you think we should be doing?
Excellent question. I mean, it's a very relevant question to me because in the psychology department, there's no psychology religion course, and there was nothing in cognitive science. So I started a course, a fourth-year course, on the cognitive science of religion. Extremely popular course. I guess best compliments I've ever received from my students. A lot of students, by the time they get to fourth year, they've taken a lot of my other courses, and even said, this was the best course you ever taught. So I'm in the position you're asking me. I'm not just foreseeing, I'm trying to foresee, right? I'm trying to put it in. I would hope that I mean, here I'm being influenced by Bloom and and Studstill and others. I would hope that what you would do is you would take a lot of time, you would learn from the humanities, their hermeneutical phenomenological project, and you would try to understand religious reports or mystical reports in terms of the person giving the report. So but don't go in with some preset template of what consciousness or cognition or reality is. Try to bracket that phenomenological, right? And go in and as much as possible using the best kind of hermeneutics, theories of interpretation, like in their own terms, come to terms, in both senses of the phrase, come to terms with the actual terms, right, and structure, right, within the report and in the body of work around the person giving the report. Like really try to get their perspectival and participatory knowing. Get right, see if you can bridge horizons so you can find that phenomenology within your experience, not just something you're pointing at, but something you can actually instantiate. See if you can find a phenomenological, right, functional fit. Does that phenomenology open up new functions for you, new cognitive ways of approaching the world that fits you to the world in a new way? Really get a taste of the interpretation. Then and only then, so you're using a lot of philosophy, you're learning a lot of social science, anthropology, doing that. Then bring in your theoretical reflection. Actually, you're going to loop like this probably, right? So over here, I'm doing interpretation, and then I bring explanation. I would want this to have that synoptic integration I was talking about earlier. All of the mind disciplines, synoptically integrated in cognitive science, and doing 4E sci, in which phenomenology and functionality and fittedness, that's what the E's are about, are prominent, and then have the interpretation and the explanation toing and froing from each other. Over here in the explanation side, you're going to be generating all kinds of particular empirical endeavors. And I end up working with people that are doing all of these. There might be behavioral measures. Often now the experiments are mixed experiments. There'll be behavioral measures and like EEG and phenomenological reports, and we're trying to coordinate them all together. And then we have people who are doing the research who do the practices, the ecology of practices, so they get the deep interpretation, and they don't try and explain away. They're the opposite of the missionary. They just, what can I learn? I mean, really learn from, right, the participant in the experiment, from the person who's in that particular community. So that's already happening. And that I would want to see more and more and more of that.
Wonderful, and I really like how you framed it now, which is like let's learn from it. Is there any particular example that you've come across in your own life where you feel like a pull towards a certain aspect of religion that you feel that is very meaningful and very important for life as a whole, but that you can't quite explain in kind of like the whole system and enterprise of cognitive science? Like, for example, if you just had, some kind of genie that you kind of rub the lamp on and you can answer all your science questions. Like, is there something that you could say, just explain that phenomenon to me because I know there's something here, but I can't explain it?
Well, for me, I mean, this is how I have the cognitive science, the 4E sci, and that sits for me within a sort of post-nihilist Neoplatonic thing that's coming out of where cog sci and biology are integrating, and one take on physics, Neoplatonism, and then that Neoplatonism is also in, I call it dialogos, mutually transformative dialogue with Zen. And so there's aspects of Zen and Neoplatonism that are not reducible or capturable in the science because they actually point to that which is deeply presupposed by the cognitive science and is beyond it. Like what is intelligibility? What is realness? What's the relationship between possibility and realness? What's the relationship between our, like, philosophical questions? But I don't want them just to be heard as conceptual questions. These are questions that have to come into the very intimacy of your intelligibility, how you're making sense. This is what both Zen and Neoplatonism keep saying. Don't just talk. Don't just talk, right? There are truths that are available to you only after you undergo transformation, right? So there's a lot that is always beyond the science, because the science is presupposing so many fundamental things. So I would argue, I mean, I'm prepared to make the argument if you want to do it, but I have argued and would argue that we carry a fundamental presupposition that the fundamental grammar of cognition and the grammar of reality, that relevance realization and reality realization are basically the same grammar. They have the same sort of structural functional organization, and so that they mutually penetrate. There's a porosity between them. And that's because I think coherence and correspondence notions of knowing don't work. You need participatory knowing. And there's a long argument there. And so that's why I'm just making that point to say science can't explain that. I mean, I can try and get cognitive theories like relevance realization or 4E or predictive processing that follow from that presupposition. But they can't explain it because they actually rely on it in order to undertake what they're doing. And then at the end, you get what Gabriel Marcel calls an ontological mystery. You get what you think is a problem and you try to frame it, and then the frame becomes problematic. Then you try and frame that even broader, and that becomes problematic. And one of those, for me, is the work I'm currently doing with Dan, is I am coming, I haven't concluded yet, but I am coming to the conclusion that there's something analogous to Heisenberg complementarity at work in something that is dear to my heart, which is meaning. I think meaning involves this interpenetration of truth and relevance. Meaning affords truth and it affords relevance. And we never pursue truth on its own. We pursue truths that are relevant to us. But we are not satisfied with just relevance. We want relevance that is corrected by truth. And yet, I always have to assume one in order to try and determine the other. So I get like a Heisenberg complementary. I can never sort of, there's a sort of a mystery to meaning that I can't, there's nowhere I can stand outside of this interpenetration of truth and relevance to look at truth relevance. And all I can say from the inside is meanings is somehow truth and relevance constraining each other and affording each other and affording truth and connectedness. So I get deep presuppositions, and then even underneath, woven through the presuppositions, are profound ontological mysteries. I think it would be a mistake to try and give a scientific account of them, because science is way downstream from the presuppositions, and the presuppositions are downstream from the mysteries.
Wonderful. That was brilliant. I really like that. And also, if I remember correctly, at least in some earlier work, you're already kind of like pointing at this duality. Obviously, duality in the sense of two things, but they're always talking with each other. But I also remember that at some point you're also trying to explain this kind of like these like fundamental categories which everything is built. But I believe that you had three things at some point. Am I misremembering? And I'm guessing two of them are what you just mentioned of truth and relevance. But I remember in some paper that you have that was a bit older, like you had these three things. Do you remember what the third thing was?
You have me at disadvantage. I'm trying to think of what it could be. I often talk about truth, relevance, and like intelligibility maps into being. So truth and relevance are like this, and they give us intelligibility, meaning. But we also have this deep presupposition that intelligibility is somehow interwoven with realness. And so to say that something is real is to make a comparative judgment, like a retrospective judgment about improvement, increase, and qualitative betterment in intelligibility. So the wooden stick is more real than the shadow stick, because I can use the wooden stick to make sense of the shadow stick much more than I can use the shadow stick to make sense of the wooden stick. And there's way more information in the wooden stick than there is in the shadow stick about sticks, right? And so we go, that's the real one. And so, sorry, I'm gesturing a lot, but truth and relevance are doing this, and that's giving us intelligibility. And then intelligibility is interwoven with being. And science presupposes this. Science presupposes that the promise of intelligibility, getting us to reality, will always be kept. that when I make better sense, I will have gotten to the more real. What argument could you give me for that presupposition? You can't give me, because any argument presupposes it. This is Spinoza's great point. Truth is its own standard. And that's a fundamental thing. And one of the things that I like about a religious orientation is it seems to be truer to that there are these things that we are fundamentally, these processes that we can't get outside of. We have to fundamentally presuppose them. And even when we're correcting them, we're just using them to correct themselves. It's kind of this primordial connectedness, which is often what has been meant in the traditions that I've studied by faith. Faith doesn't mean irrational belief. It means this sense of a primordial connectedness, that there's nowhere I can go where I do not face the Four Noble Truths or the Tao or God. So, all this suffering, that sounds like a truth claim that's false. But what it means is, no, the very processes that make me adaptive, make me prone to self-deception, and all I can use to overcome the self-deception are the adaptive process. And so no matter where I go, I'm beset by the threat of self-deception. That seems to me to be an incredibly strong argument. If you read it just as a truth claim, it's false. But if you read it as an expression of faith, that's why Stephen Batchelor says we shouldn't call them the Four Noble Truths, we should call them the Four Ennobling Truths. See, the idea I'm trying to get at is that religion tries to say we're always in these fundamental processes we have to presuppose, and they have a kind of primordiality and ultimacy for us, and they're interwoven with mystery. And again, this doesn't have to be woo, it doesn't have to be sloppy thinking, it doesn't have to be intellectual escapism. It doesn't have to be. Do those things emerge in religious people? Yes. Do they also emerge in popular science, in popular culture? Yes. Do they even emerge in the history of science? Yes. So again, we should stop comparing good science to bad religion. And the fundamentalists should stop comparing good religion to bad science. We should compare good science to good religion, bad science to bad religion. So religion is more honest, to my mind, about this aspect of this fundamental connectedness, these fundamental presuppositions, right? That intelligibility is somehow not logically identical to, but one with being. And then we participate in that through intelligibility, meaning, which is this interweaving of truth and relevance.
Yeah, wonderful. And I'm curious, like a lot of your grammar, like a lot, like is very Neoplatonic. So there's two things that I want to get at. One is, how do you see the jump from Plato to Plotinus and the whole Neoplatonic tradition?
Oh, wow.
And then a concise version, if you can. No needs to get into it. I'm sure you can write many books on it. And a related thing that I'm curious about is, like, Platonism to me has also been more influential, and to me, it's the more convincing it is, the more I learn about it, the more I read, the more I talk it over with you, and so on. But I also find it very hard to explain to people, like these especially these notions of intelligibility. I think it's very dense for people, I think. Yes. From my experience. Yeah. So I would also like for you to try to attempt, like, how do you think we can translate all this Neoplatonic grammar and these notions of intelligibility to the average person, right? Like, not to the philosopher, not to the cognitive science, just from the friends that is at, a coffee shop, and they're interested in what you're saying, but they just can't understand what you're saying.
Yeah. So, I mean, that would be a description of a lot of the work I end up doing. I would get them first. I would do the kind of usual dog and pony show I do to try and get people to realize how central relevance realization is. That look at all you could paying attention to right now, and you're ignoring most of it. All you could be remembering, and all the possible combinations, and you're ignoring it. All the sequences of behavior you could do, and you're ignoring most of them. All the possibilities you could consider, and you're ignoring most of them. But you don't ignore everything. You somehow zero in on that. And notice, like, be really honest. Don't Don't talk the language given to you by the enlightenment. Really pay attention to the phenomenology, the actual structure. Where is that relevance? Is it in the object? Like, this is relevant to me right now? Was that somehow in there? It doesn't seem right. I mean, I've got arguments, but I'm just trying to do what you're asked, right? Well, is it just in your head? Is it just a subjective experience? No, because you can get it wrong. In fact, you'll have powerful experiences when you realize you got it wrong. You'll go, aha, you'll have an insight experience. I thought she was angry and it turns out she's afraid. And so I get them to see, notice what's going on here. You've got this connectedness, right? And it's really central. And it's got this life of, it's in between, and it's got this life of its own. And you experience that in aha, insight. And notice that connectedness is actually how most people talk about their lot, what makes their life meaningful. They want to be connected to something larger than themselves. They don't mean physically bigger. Like chain them to an ocean liner, they don't go, ah, yes, now. What do they mean? Well, they mean this. When I'm in a dream, I am in this little world, and it seems real. Remember, real is comparative. And they wake up, and from this, they can see why that isn't real. You get a realization or enlightenment. The room is dark. I'm mostly ignorant. I don't know what's going on in the room. I turn on the light, and from that more enlightened, literally enlightened perspective, I can see how I was wrong, how I was self-deceived, how I was ignorant. So this intelligibility that is at the core and that you enjoy in insight experience or flow experiences is also at the root of what you most want, which is deep meaning in life. Oh, meaning, yeah, I want my life to be meaningful. Why do you say it's deep? Because we know that human beings will sacrifice all the other things. Okay, so this is a Darwinian example. Having a kid. When you have a kid, your longevity goes down. It's measurable. You're sick all the time. You're hungry all the time. You're sleep deprived. There is an alarm going off that evolution has programmed you to find the most distressing noise you'll ever hear as a human being. Your partner, who you thought was your best friend and loves you more than it, hates you right now. You're sick. You're not doing well at work, and you're cut off from your friends. So all wealth, health, social connectedness, autonomy, everything's crashing. Why do you do it? Makes your life more meaningful. I want to be, because the child is, right? The child is something that is real beyond my egocentric concerns. I'm connecting to something, and I have to change myself and transform myself, right, in order to realize, in both senses of the word, that child. In the very guts of your momentary experience, at the height of your insight and your flow, and of those moments that you find the most meaningful, that's intelligibility.
Perfect. I like that. That was well put. And how did this first show up to you in your journey through Plato and then Neoplatonism?
So I had been brought up, I've told this story multiple times, I hope it's not tiring to listeners. I've been brought up in a very fundamentalist Christianity extended family. I came to leave that later in therapy, recognize I had been traumatized. Some of the most terrifying experiences I had in my life were because of that framework. And so that framework, there's nothing that framework can say to me that will ever draw me back to it. Because it afforded the worst terror I've ever experienced in my life and deep trauma. However, and there's evidence to back this up, this is not idiosyncratic to me. We're gathering empirical evidence for what's called religious residual. People who have been religious and deconstruct. So if you measure them on various, validated scales, they don't drop down to the level of people who were never religious. Like they're in between. I like to use the metaphor that they have a taste for the transcendent left in their mouth. They often do. This is almost becoming a cliche. They transfer to a political ideology which they identify with and pursue religiously, right? I've seen that multiple times. I have a friend that's happening right now. Something like that for me too. But thankfully, before I had gotten down that rabbit hole, I was in this meaning crisis. Now, I only thought it was specific to me. Adolescent is a very egocentric time. Uh, uh, and I went into university and I took a first year philosophy course because I'd been reading some philosophical novels. And I met the figure of Socrates in the Republic. And it was like, that's what I want. That's what I want. I want that transformative wisdom. Now, to be honest, I was seduced. That's Plato's term, not mine, so don't me too me, right? But right, I was seduced because initially I wanted to win all the arguments like Socrates does. But as you start to get into that, as you start to internalize Socrates, he gets into your head and your heart, and he starts to, right? Yeah, but that's the love of victory. That's what I'm actually criticizing. Where's the love of knowledge? Where's the love of wisdom? And Socrates works on you. I mean, although I have a much more positive attitude, I'd like to quote Nietzsche's quote: Socrates is so close to me, I'm always fighting him, right? And so it's like that. So Socrates has took me into that. But then what happened is in academic philosophy at the time, this is changing now, thankfully, but at the time, the topic of wisdom, the thing that's in the very name of the discipline, falls off the table. You can get a little bit of it if you take a couple courses on existentialism, or if you do some religious philosophy, maybe at that time. But all we're talking about is scientific knowledge and ethics, and it's such a European Enlightenment thing, And what we do is we fragment it because of Kant's three critiques. We have ethics, and we have aesthetics, and we have epistemology, right? And perhaps we don't do metaphysics anymore. You understand? And ontologies in there too. Um, and I found all of that very powerful in terms of giving me skills, but that taste for the transcendent and this figure of Socrates, which was alive in me, was not being met. So down the street, there was a place, Tai Chi and Meditation Center, teaching an ecology of practices. They didn't call it that, but that's where I got the original idea from, was them. They were teaching Vipassana, meditation, meta contemplation, and Tai Chi Chuan. And I started to get, oh. I started to hear about this. I've been doing philosophy, this new discipline, cognitive science, and I start going in there, right? And and I'm originally in Fodor, but the issue of meaning is right central. And I start to make this progress towards 4E Kogsai, right? And Buddhism and Taoism and Zen are really, so that's all starting to vibrate. And then I start to read Pierre Hadot, Philosophy is a Way of Life, ancient philosophy, and I start to go, oh. And then I've been get influenced by the Kyoto school, especially Nishida Nishitani, and I see, right, the deep the resonances with Heidegger. It's also 4E Kogsai. And then through Hadot, I start to realize, I was a maverick when I said this, but more and more people are saying, for all of his explicit anti-Platonism, Heidegger's a Neoplatonist through and through. I mean, because Eckhart, for example, is a Christian Neoplatonist through and through. And I started to go, Neoplatonism, and then I go back and I read the Simplicity Vision, I read Plotinus, and I go, oh my God, this is like the Tao Te Ching. This is like the Diamond Sutra, in that it's philosophy and transformative practice wound together, but it also connects with 4E Kogsai, right? And I went, oh. And then I just went with it. And so what I saw in Plotinus was somebody that was doing the synoptic integration I was pursuing in cognitive science. He was taking he was taking Socratic, right, existential, like presence, Platonic spirituality, Stoic ethics and therapeutics, Aristotelian science, right, Pythagorean ideas about intelligibility and mathematics, and he's integrating it all together like it's the grand unified field theory of ancient philosophy. And I went, oh my God. And that's how it landed for me.
Yeah, wonderful. Obviously, I knew a little bit of your Christian background, but I actually haven't heard kind of like the full-fledged transition.
And the Neoplatonism has taken me back, not into Christianity, but I wouldn't call myself a Christian, but into somebody who is genuinely on pilgrimage through Christianity and who has come to love it. I love Jewish Neoplatonism, especially in Spinoza, but also the work that Zevi Slavin does. Just amazing stuff. And Sufism is Islamic Neoplatonism through and through. But the form of Neoplatonism I like the best, the one that resonates the most to me, probably some of that psychological, idiosyncratic, but I think there's also something, I think the integration of henosis from pagan Neoplatonism and kenosis from Christianity into henosis, kenosis, theosis of Christian Neoplatonism is just I find that profoundly, plausibly true.
Yeah, wonderful. And so because of everything that you've mentioned, you seemed to be okay with kind of this identity of kind of this Zen Neoplatonist.
Yep, that's how I most frequently describe myself.
Yeah, exactly. So I would be curious, number one, like maybe for people that aren't as deep into these things, like maybe explicitly draw the connections that you saw between Zen and Platonism, and also maybe try to kind of make sense of that contrast, because a lot of people have often framed the West and the East always in opposition, has like these two fundamental different approaches to reality. And I even feel this in my own thinking as well. I feel it has something that can be overcome, but I'm not quite sure how. I'm always feel these two pools, and I say these two are brilliant. If only I had kind of this secret key to mesh these things together in like pure coherence, then kind of I would see the fullness of being, let's say. So I'd be very curious about how you articulate.
It's a work in progress. I'm literally teaching a course right now on the lectern, my online teaching platform called From East to West on Zen Neoplatonism. So I would argue D.C. Schindler has this notion of the centrality of goodness, which he gets from Plato, right? Again, a long argument here, but the gist of it is reality seems to be good in that it saves us from the nightmares of solipsism and alienation, right? There's a way in which this thing is for itself. That means I can't subsume it or consume it into my subjectivity. And I don't want to do that because that's a nightmare. The last thing I want to be is trapped inside of myself in some sort of Cartesian nightmare. But it's also for others. So it's for itself and for others. So although I can't subsume it, I'm also not alienated from it. I can come into conformity with it. This is kind of this is ontological goodness. This is why we like realness. That's the Neoplatonic proposal, right? David is a Christian Neoplatonist, D.C. Schindler. The two mistakes I can make with you is you're totally other than me. You're essentially other than me, or you're essentially the same as me. Both of those will undermine any I-thou dialogue between you and I. Is that at least initially plausible? So the two mistakes we've had, the two moments we've had when we've done this is we had essentialism, which is a kind of product perennialism. They're all saying the same thing. They're saying essentially the same thing. And this is a judgment of similarity. And judgments of similarity, you know this argument, are deeply dependent on judgments of relevance realization. There's no you don't see similarity, although you think you do, right? It's not algorithmic that way. It's deeply dependent on your relevance realization. But equally, so is difference, right? So what we did is we had people like Huxley and Otto. They're saying the same thing. And then we had Katz and the constructive. No. And by the way, that's a very imperialist view of religion, because you have to have this idea of religion as these partitioned, pure, homogeneous things. And for all kinds of reasons, both of these are empirically you can disconfirm both of them. They're both wrong, right? And so it's not that Zen and Neoplatonism are saying the same thing. And it's not that they are completely different from each other. They can in dialogue play with relevance realization so they can play with similarity and difference. So there can be an opponent processing between Zen and Neoplatonism. Zen can help Neoplaton. Remember we were talking about that pilgrimage? Or that I'm really bad at detecting my own biases, but I can detect yours really well, and vice versa. And so you are my best chance of correcting my bias, and I'm your best chance. That's what democracy was supposed to be based on. We've forgotten that deep lesson. Zen is one of the best ways to correct Neoplatonism, and Neoplatonism is one of the best ways to correct Zen. They have proper opponent processing because they take us in different directions. Zen is very kenosis. It's very about frame breaking, emptying. It's about trying to get into a profound, a phenomenological intimacy with the primordiality of our experience of realness. And I think I agree with Hinton and Greg and others that Zen is much more Taoist than Buddhist. So it's got this notion of the Tao, this primordial, right? Neoplatonism is not about bringing intelligibility to this phenomenological intimacy with primordiality. It's the other that can connect because it's about, no, I want to be intimate with intelligibility that takes me towards what's ultimate, right? It's these two different senses. One is a very immanent sense of realness, the most immanent, the immanence that it can be, the most immanent. The other is, no, the most transcendent, right? And so I want to somehow, I want to be in an intimate, love is the great metaphor. I want to love, I want to be in an intimate relationship to this source field of the true, the good, the beautiful, right? All of these things that transcend me, that correct me, that call me, right? And I want to be intimate with that. And then the Zen person is saying, no, right? We need to make sense of the intimacy we have with primordiality. But right, the kenosis is a frame breaking, and the henosis of Neoplatonism is a frame making. And what they actually do, these are two different ways of generating insight in the psychological literature. My proposal is, you know what actually is better than either kenosis or henosis? Doing this, doing opponent processing, frame breaking for the sake of frame making, and frame making for the sake of, so Neoplatonism phenomenologically opens me so that nothing is excluded. And Zen empties me so nothing is enclosed. And they both lead me into pure non-duality, pure relationality.
That was one of the best things I ever heard in my life. That was so good.
Well, I mean, that's the gist of a much larger argument.
Yeah, and I'm really looking forward to watching your course. I just wish I had infinite time because I have a billion things to.
I've always wanted to have the TARDIS of Doctor Who, where you can go in there in time and space. You're isolated somehow from time passing or space, and then come back and no time has passed. Yeah, that would be great.
It's a hyperbolic time chamber for Dragon Ball Z enthusiasts, the intellectual version. But yeah, that was super good.
The thing is, I mean, Zen sort of takes you into the heart of life, broadly construed, phenomenological, cognitive, sensual, experiential life. And Neoplatonism takes you into the heart of science, understood as scientia, as knowing. And these are the two things. And for me, an exclusive claim on either side doesn't work. There is no experiencing that isn't also a knowing. There's no knowing that ultimately, this is Evan Thompson, right? And Frank Gleiser and Thompson, the blind spot. There is no knowing that is ultimately severable from the phenomenological field, right? And so Neoplatonism, as I've argued earlier, like really takes me into the heart of science, Zen takes me into the heart of life, and then the two are deeply belonging together.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Something that I would like to get your take on is what kind of frame do you have when you're deciding, I suppose, even though deciding is the wrong approach, but like what religious traditions to pay attention to. So for example,
Sure.
the first paper that I was ever trying to write, when I submitted to a journal, it wasn't accepted because I rushed it and then I eventually gave up on the idea and decided to write something else. But I was trying to bring religion to the forefront. And one of the things that one of the reviewers said was, obviously he didn't frame it that way, he was more polite, but he's like, they're just like this white men preaching these like big book religions, and you're basically ignoring everything else, right? Like you, and I think I view this perspective a lot in the US, because I think they're kind of the problem of colonialism and kind of the indigenous cultures, and because of ayahuasca is very connected with Mexico and Brazil and things like that. You know, that problem is kind of a lot closer home than what I see here in Europe. And I thought it was kind of like, yeah, not an argument in good faith, but nevertheless, obviously there's a point there, right? And I've always tried to, and ever since that comment, which was quite a while ago, that always kind of comes to mind. She's like, I love Christianity, I love Neoplatonism, I do love Eastern traditions as well, even though I'm not as well versed on it. But it's like, why those? Like I don't want to make kind of like an elitist claim over the spirituality and the religious traditions of everyone else, but I'm not sure how to not do that.
We're facing a problem, which is you can't know deeply all of the religions that have ever existed or even currently exist. So there's a way in which the criticism is unfair, because like, do you do that even in your scientific endeavors? Come on, you can't. Like even a cognitive scientist, I don't know, I can't study chemistry. So it's got to be, okay, so first of all, let's not create a straw person in which we're holding people to a standard that nobody can fulfill. Okay, so what's a fair thing to do? I mean, this is sort of where my thinking is at right now. This is why Charles Taylor and the work I do on theoria in the three senses of theory, contemplation, and pilgrimage is so important, right? I've been trying to pick up the scent of the sacred. So I'm going to ask for your forbearance, because again, this is very much on the edge of my thinking, because this question is really central to me, especially after reading Taves and a bunch of other people, like the long critique of a colonialist attitude towards religion, an essentialist attitude. We've got to put that aside, and that was bound up with the European Enlightenment, right? One of the things that did this is I tried to get, okay, where did you experience this outside of a particular religious framework? Me, John, right? Again, try to do the phenomenology, right? Try to bring the depth of experience and the depths of science together. Is in a great play, which I think is one of the best works of art on the meaning crisis, Peter Schaeffer's Equus. I identify very strongly with the psychiatrist, Dysart, the main character in Equus. And what's happening in Equus, I'll try not to do too spoilers, but it's been around for a long time. So if you can't see the play, I've never had the opportunity to see the play. It's one of my life quests. I want to see the play. There's an excellent film version starring Richard Burton as Dysart. It's one of his last roles, and it's one of his best. Brilliant. So what's happening is there's this boy, young adult, Alan, and he's done something horrific. There's obviously something going wrong, and they bring him to Dysart, the psychiatrist. I'm going somewhere with this. And as Dysart is treating Alan, we're starting to get what's actually going on. And we also get snippets of his life and what's driving Dysart, right? And then what happens is brilliant, because it's a unique, I haven't seen this kind of tragic structure emerge. Dysart realizes that a new religion is being born in Alan, a new religion. And what the movie gets even better than the screenplay is what's happening is this, and you can hear Jung in here. Things that, and relevance realization, things that weren't connected are suddenly they're being magnetized to each other, and they're being drawn together, and all these different things, like from his unconscious and his life, and from images and from the culture, and they're all magnetizing together. They're not just an empty cacophony or just some weird, mashup. They're doing this. I call it a semiotic symbiosis. Semiosis having to do with meaning. And symbiosis is like when two life forms eventually merge, like there was some archaic algae-like thing in some bacteria, and it invaded, and it became the mitochondria, and we got the eukaryote cell, and it allows for multicellular organisms. That's symbiosis, right? And so all these things are coming together, right? The tragedy for Dysart is this: he longs to experience and confront the sacred. That's just his existential. He's in the meaning crisis. And then he's in this tragedy of, in order to cure Alan, he has to destroy the religion. But he doesn't want to destroy the religion because he's finally confronted with the real phenomena facing him and challenging him in person. I won't say what happens. And I was like, oh my God. And then I started looking, and then I realized, wait, Neoplatonism is doing that. Remember I just did it a few minutes ago? It's magnetized. What about Zen? Oh, wait, Zen is taking Buddhism and then Mahayana and then mixed with the martial arts and Bodhidharma, and then it's going into China and meeting Taoism, and it's doing this weird thing. And then it goes to Japan, and there's an indigenous religion of Shinto, and it's like, whoa. And then right? And then I'm thinking, oh, right. And then Neoplatonism forms symbiosis with Christianity and Islam, right? And Christianity. And then I look inside, I get into the scholarship of sort of the history of the sacredness of God, divine images, right? And the God of the Abrahamic religions, like there's this Canaanite high god El. It's in Israel, and Micah El, and Joah El, and all these names, right? There's this high god, and he's wisdom, and he's very transcendent. And then there's this other god. I won't say the name in case there's Jewish people. YHWH, right? And he seems to be a god of warfare and volcanoes and metallurgy, and those all actually weirdly draw together. And he's very immanent, and he's about change. And these two gods draw together, and they somehow form this symbiosis. And then, right, there was a consort, Asheroth, was female, and a lot of her properties then get absorbed in. And then YHWH was, in competition with Baal, and right, and starts to absorb a lot of the imagery, and then you get this figure, and then goes into the Babylonian exile and faces this challenge because God used to belong to a land. And in the Bible, there's characters there's one guy, he carries dirt with him because if he doesn't have dirt from his homeland, he can't worship the God of the Bible. But they're in the exile and they can't do that anymore. So God has to change. He has to become more universal. And there, the Babylonians get conquered by the Zoroastrians, and they meet Ahura Mazda, the cosmic god, and with angels and a cosmic battle between good and evil. And then that comes back because the Persians, right? And they meet, right? Alexander the Great and the Greeks that conquer the Persians, and you get Philo of Alexandria saying, wait, the Platonic good and this God, they somehow are one, and all of the theologies start to give, and that starts to, and meanwhile, right, Platonism, he's part of Middle Platonism, that starts to go into people like Justin and Clement, and then, right, Platonism develops into Neoplatonism, a great magnetism, and it draws it all together. God's not only the good, God is the one, and the one is the good, is the God, is El, is, and I could keep going. And I thought, oh, if I'm going to go on a pilgrimage, I'm going to follow the trail of semiotic symbiosis, and I'm going to use my training in synoptic integration as the best possible education for trying to make sense of the sacred. Now, the village atheist will take that and go, see, it's all historical contingency. I say exactly the opposite. No, that is the lifeblood of sacredness. And that's what Dysart experienced. That's how I choose.
Yeah, that was brilliant. Thank you so much for that. And it's always like I'm gonna pivot a lot here, but just as a comment that just popped into my mind. like to me it's just absurd, like how well read you are, and it always kind of like blows my mind. Like for example, even just this.
I'm just an incredible introvert who's had 4 decades, right? So
Yeah, but still, and something that was on my mind recently, like I've seen a lot of criticism of you online, and a lot of people consider you kind of a scam intellectual, let's say. Some people, obviously, a lot of people have rightfully a lot of respect for you, but some people are deeply skeptical. They just don't buy it. In part because of the religious inclinations, in part because you have a little bit of history with Peterson. Peterson, this is like bad guy over there. Yeah. There's a lot of reasons, and some of them try to actually argue why that's the case. Sometimes very badly, but that has prompted me to question myself, because you should question yourself all the time, right? It's kind of like, is this person maybe not as knowledgeable as I think it is, right? Like, am I being misled in some way that I haven't realized, right? Yeah. And one of the reasons that have always settled that question very easily for me is that you're mentioning all these things, like all these thinkers. And for example, when I was in the beginning of watching The Meaning Crisis, for example, I was like, I don't know any of these people. Right? Like, so, and like, I don't know this field very well. And it's like, he's saying this and makes sense, but like, I don't know. But sometimes I do have to know, right? Like if I'm interested, or if I need to make an argument, I need to read it. And every time I read it, I'm like, oh crap, John got it exactly right. Like every time I like go on like a little rabbit hole because I need it, or because it's interesting, I'm like, yes, he made justice. Like he's not just like randomly taking Plato out of context. He's not just like randomly going to dynamical systems and making his own thing. No, that is like a rightful interpretation of what is happening here in philosophy and science and whatnot.
there's other interpretations.
Of course, there's always more interpretations, right?
All I hope for is what you did, that people will genuinely go back and look at and say, does John give a plausible and intellectually respectful interpretation? And I talk to a lot of academic philosophers and cognitive scientists, and they give me feedback. My peers give me feedback that I'm doing that. So I worry about this too.
Yeah, and so obviously, you mentioned already that being an introvert and having a lot of years on you that you were able to rightfully put to use into some very helpful reading. Obviously, that's a major part. But I'm just curious, like,
I love reading.
right?
If there's one thing I could do, is like read and write and discuss those 3 things.
Yeah, exactly the same for me. I love. I often think about to myself, like, if I could choose, because one of the problems that I have with reading is that it makes it really hard because of my ADHD. Like, you have to do it in chunks. Yeah. So like every time, sometimes you kind of like wonder, like, if I could change something in my life, what it would be. To me, like, often what the superpower that comes to mind is like, I wish I could just read forever. I wish I could just sit down, read, and not stop reading until I need to go to bed. But I can't, unfortunately. But besides this kind of this time issue of just accumulating years, do you have any advice for people that, number one, just really want to get into the meat of things, like being really knowledgeable at the same, like deeper into topics, but also being very widely read, like you are, like for example, being able to just have deep expertise in cognitive science, but also being like really aware of, for example, all kind of like biblical criticism and history and whatnot. So like, how can people do that?
It takes a long time. I mean, don't forget, I've also been a practitioner. Like I've been playing Tai Chi and Vipassana and Neoplatonic for like, what, 33 years? Something like that. 35 years, sorry. I've built up strategies. They work for me. I never read a single book. I read a bunch of books in concert. They're often from different fields and different perspectives, and I try to get them to talk to each other. I try to make, and I become the holding place, the living space, right? It's alive. Sorry, living space has Nazi connotations that I don't want, but it's a space that's alive. I'll say it that way. It's a space that's alive, right? Where Ibn Arabi is arguing with Evan Thompson, right? Stevenson, the guy who wrote Treasure Island, he would wake up with his characters talking to each other in his head. It's kind of like that for me. I've taught myself to read so that I internalize these people it's not quite visual like this, but they're talking to each other. And I like my books, I mark them all up with the marginalia. That's why electronic books up till now have not been very good. Bishop Maximus thinks he's got a ink pad for me that'll work. Because I'm running out of physical space for all my books, right? And so I'll constantly refer to, and I use all the blank pages at the back of a book. And what I'm doing in there is I'm not only making my comments, I'm thinking how these other people, and so the books are all become very interwoven, intertextual. And that sounds like it, initially that's harder, but that complexification, because I'm both differentiating and integrating them at the same time, that complexification produces these emergent insights that then feed back, like, like global broadcast and the theory of consciousness. They feed back, right, into the specific areas, and it does that for me. And because there's a lot of differentiation, I can read a lot longer, because I can read an hour here, an hour here, an hour here, and an hour here. And they're very different, but they're also not disconnected. And so and they're integrated. So I'm actually going on pilgrimage through all these books continually.
To me, that's almost incomprehensible. Like, to me, that sounds a crazy reading. But something like, just a random comment, but something interesting that popped to mind is, for example, when he mentions that you can read longer because you're jumping between them. For me, that doesn't work. Like, no matter what I read, just my brain just shuts off at some point. But something very interesting, which is that doesn't happen with dialogue. Like, what we're doing here, we will end it soon out of respect for you and your time and your energy. But I could do this almost unlimited. Like, it's just crazy. My attention does not ever run out, which is just crazy.
Again, you do have ADHD, and I don't. But the reading becomes more and more dialogical like that for me. It's become dialogical, like I'm talking with people and dialoguing with people, rather than I'm just consuming propositions.
Yeah, maybe I just need to do better, read better, and getting in this more dialogical format. Now, something that obviously we've talked about a lot throughout this conversation is this positive reevaluation of religion, which I think is very important. It's a big theme in your work. It's a big theme in my work.
Just to be clear, I also reject nostalgia, totally, philosophically, consistently. I reject both utopianism and nostalgia, two moods of religion that have drenched the world in blood that I don't want to have anything to do with.
Yeah, of course. Now, an issue about this sort of position, and I felt this a lot in my own life, personally, and has some form of intellectual, I suppose, is that I'm always between two worlds. Mm-hmm. And I can never find kind of like a home where I can be comfortable without feeling that I either don't belong, or that I'm being attacked by the other people in the home or in the city or whatever it may be. And so it's something that I struggle quite a lot, because even though it's quite hard to explain, actually, because it's not a home in a literal sense, right? Like, I'm not literally being attacked, but like, even though it's just this vague intellectual space kind of perspective, it still kind of grabs you to some degree, and something that I struggle a lot. And because I've been growing into this more religious way of being, which I found tremendously helpful for me personally and academically, and it has made my life better in infinite of ways, it's also a little bit problematic, because that also makes me kind of make religion my home. But then every time that I try to have some sort of dialogue, that also becomes quite problematic, because sometimes that dialogue within that home is very problematic. Yep. And it's very problematic because there are certain assumptions from the religious community and worldview that they're often not willing to give up. And that makes conversations very, very difficult. And so, for all the positives that you mentioned about religion, there's also this negative aspect where there's often certain aspects of the worldview that seem very hard to reconcile with other things. So I would like to ask you, for someone in our position, I suppose it's both, that do want to make that dialogue, but there's certain barriers there. How can we dissolve those barriers? Like, how can we eventually reach a place where those two homes can be more integrated into a new, more wholesome home, but also while trying to make sense, not trying to make sense, trying to do justice to the reason why those barriers exist. Because you can go this in the direction that you want. But for me personally, a more specific way that I typically struggle with this is that there's certain metaphysics and certain notions about reality that I don't accept, that a lot of people in religion accept.
Mm-hmm.
That's make that conversation very difficult. But at the same time, I also feel very uneasy about like completely trying to demolish that every time, because I feel like a lot of times I'm forced into that confrontation. But then when I am in that confrontation, I very often have like PTSD flashbacks of like, this is what I was doing 10 and 15 years ago. And this is like, and also, there's also a position of humility, which is like, who am I to say, that my world is view correct, right? Like, of course, I think my metaphysics are correct. Like, no crap, right? Like everyone does. So how can we navigate this space?
That's a really important question. I'll try and do different dimensions that you touched upon. You mentioned that people criticize me. I get criticized from both sides. The atheists hate me, and a lot of the theists hate me. I've turned that around to being a heuristic for generally guiding me. So I've turned that into I must be doing something right, because I believe, with argument and evidence, that their shared framework of presuppositions, that the sacred is the supernatural is a substance, the substance is a singular thing, and the proper relationship to it is belief. And all we're arguing about is whether or not that individualized supernatural substance exists, and my beliefs are true. I think that is a grotesque misreading. It's imperialistic, it's ethnocentric, it does not capture all the semiotic symbiosis. It does not capture that there is no bloody thing, Christianity. There are Christianities, even within a church. At one church, you don't have a homogeneous, like when you do the research, it's not there. It's not there, right? And so for me, yeah, I reject that whole shared framework that is usually the basis of a lot of the debate. Then what I do is I say, well, I've learned from philosophy that, as you just said, people really believe their own metaphysics, and that some of it is negotiable. This is a Socratic principle. Some of it's not. And so what you do is you talk to people where you're both willing to enter into mutual transformation. That's what I mean by dialogos, right? So I've given up, like you. I don't want to destroy anybody's faith, but I also don't want anybody to try and convert me to theirs. What I want to do is, with anybody, can we enter into a mutually transformative opponent processing so that both of us can say, I got to a place where I couldn't have got to on my own? Do we have to agree? No, but have we both moved? I talk about this as switching metaphors, going from the courtroom of debate to the courtyard of dialogos, right? Like the Silk Road was. That's the next thing. The third thing, the research shows that the propositions, even thinking of religion as a system of belief, is a European Enlightenment colonial imperialist attitude towards religion. Most religions are not primarily about what we now call belief. Even our word belief. I was doing this with somebody the other day. They were talking to me after when I get the Eneruth lecture in Sweden. And he kept saying, well, I believe that. And then he would flip to believe in. Well, I believe that, so I don't believe in God. And I said, why'd you flip? What? Why'd you go from believe that to believe in? Why didn't you just say keep with believe that? Well, because there's an equivocation between asserting a proposition and the original meaning of beleben, which is to give your heart to, which is about your orientation. And the research, and some of it's good empirical research, my former student, now colleague, Jinsun Kim, right? The propositions don't, you can look at people trying to cultivate wisdom. The people in religious traditions do better than the secular people. But is there any difference between the Muslim, the Jew, the Buddhist, the Christian? No. The propositions aren't doing the work. This goes to much longer argument, which you know I've made in multiple places. The propositional knowing is not the primary knowing that carries the connectedness of meaning in life, that carries the betweenness of cognition, of participation, of religio. It has much more to do with our skills and our states of consciousness and our habits of character. And so while I reject propositional perennialism, that all the religions are saying the same thing, many people like Studstill and Bloom are arguing, and even cats, think about cats. Well, everybody is, right, it's all mediated by every conceptual scheme. He's got he's got universal processes of conceptual scheme formation, of Kantian mediation. He's a process perennialist. Everybody is either a product or a process perennialist. And so the processes are perennial. The processes by which we make meaning, undergo transformation, right? I didn't say the practices. The practices vary. The analogy I like to use is evolution. Evolution is a universal process that produces incredible diversity of organisms and ecologies to fit an incredible diversity of reality. So because we have a universal process, we can understand how it all works together. And this is one of the things that Thad Emanuel makes in his book. You know, we like to use the metaphor. So he calls the book's called "Circling the Elephant." The story. The one man touched it, and it was a rope, and another, and it's a tree, and another, and there's a very good liberal tolerance. And he sort of savagely criticizes it. He says, but notice what's going on here. We're missing something. First of all, they're sharing the space by which they can all talk to each other, and the parts actually integrate with each other. I can keep my hand on the elephant and go from the leg to the ear to the tusk. There's a through line in dialogue and in sensory motor interaction that we can tap into that affords you and I engaging in a process of mutual transformation so that we can do the heavy lifting of becoming wiser, better oriented to ultimate primordial reality, sacredness. So that's why the philosophical Silk Road metaphor and pilgrimage on the philosophical Silk Road. Here's the final argument. We can't afford to be divided. The people who, for lack of a better way of saying this, people who love sacredness, you do, I think, we can't afford to be divided from each other because of the meaning crisis, the meta crisis, and the fuel on those fires of social media and AGI and techno-feudalism and political polarization and rampant, dangerous political ideological fervor. The people who love the sacred need to be friends with each other. We have to hang together or we're going to fall apart. That's my third argument. Fourth argument is all sacredness is ultimately semiotic symbiosis. The way your religion is now is not the way it was 1,000 years from now. So I try to say to people, don't think of it as a belief system that you're trying to preserve. Think of it as secure attachment. I just got to meet Per, what is his name, Granfist? The guy who's doing the seminal work on attachment theory and religion. He was the guy hosting the Enerud lectures. And I love Sarah, my beloved. I'm securely attached. She's helped me to actually transform into a secure attachment style. What we know from secure attachment is, unlike disorganized, avoidant, and anxious, it actually empowers and affords other relationships, friendship, philia. So the eros, in the Platonic sense, I have for whatever religion I'm in, right? I should think of it as secure attachment. I'm faithful to Sarah. I don't claim metaphysically that all other women are somehow ugly or inferior, but I'm faithful to Sarah. I'm securely attached, and that allows me to enter into healthy friendships. I want the Christian to, I would like my work to help them find a secure attachment in Christianity that affords them not loving Buddhists. They're supposed to do that. Loving Buddhism, Like, what is it, Paul Nitter's book, Without Buddha, I Couldn't Be a Christian. Like passing through Buddhism, like in Tolkien's sense of recovery, passing through Buddhism to recover things in Christianity I can't see if I never leave home. That's what I want to do. Those are my arguments.
Yeah, that was beautiful, and I really feel a very strong kind of a attraction to that way of thinking, because it's something that I've also felt a lot in my relationship to Christianity, which is I can see Christianity deeper every time I get outside of it.
Yes.
And to me,
You're securely attached. I mean, I would say that's evidence that you are securely attached to Christianity rather than trying to somehow logically preserve a set of doctrines.
yeah, and also like there's also a notion of kind of, yeah, I don't have this fully fleshed out, but something that often comes to mind is that it's also a notion of identity to some degree. And then once you kind of see the borders, it's easier for you to go deeper, because something that I find very odd about this kind of like comparative religion and perennialism kind of debate is like a lot of times people are afraid to do this kind of comparison. But to me, the comparison is always like, did you find differences? Then great.
Yeah.
Something like no, sorry. If you find similarities, then great. Like there's clearly a shared ground, right? Some kind of process at hand here. But then if you find differences, then to me, it's also great, right?
Yes.
Like now I understand better what Christianity is. Now I understand better what Buddhism is, and that kind of like bordering, that kind of somehow like it allows you to go deeper into it and fall, more deeply in love within it.
Yes, very much. And so, again, if you give up the idea that religions are, this homogeneous, pristine, pure, partitioned, permanent things, and use the ecological, their ecologies of practices. Well, think about biological ecologies. They don't clearly end. They bleed into each other. They constrain and influence each other. And by the way, I forget the name of the guy who wrote the book In Praise of Mixed Religions. That's what's always been going on. We have these interlocking ecologies that penetrate into each other, bleed, and we get invasive species from one ecology to the other, and people travel between. Like that's what's always been the case. Like think about people like Thomas Merton, right? Who goes into, like, one of the books that opened me up to Zen was written by a Christian monk, Zen and the Birds of Appetite. He goes into Zen and it allows him to recover what I would say are, right, the Neoplatonic depths of Christianity. But he does it not primarily through doctrine. He does it through all the non-propositional, the practices, the states of consciousness, the virtues, the habits, right, the inhabitation. And it was like, and that book blew me away. And it's been happening for decades. There's a book, there's a whole community called Zen Catholicism. For most Catholics, is what? Yes, Zen. There's and he's recognized by both lineages, Zen and Catholic. It's like, this isn't like. In fact, the research is showing many people are increasingly interreligious rather than singular religious. Now they typically have, what I'm describing, they usually have their home religion where they have this secure attachment that allows them to have a deep philia for other traditions. Ibn Herschel, famous book, No Religion is an Island. That's a Jew, and he's saying that from the heart of his Judaism. I'm relying on people who might be following this to understand that I have a lot of published, both in academic journals, conferences, but also public, a lot of scientific work behind a lot of what I'm saying here, a lot of scientific and philosophical work. So I just wanted to say that.
Of course, no. That's completely valid. The reason why I dragged you more into the religious dimension is because I feel like that's the most interesting and that's the more meaty. But also, there's like the credibility and the justification why this isn't just like random people's opinions, right? But yeah, it's a good disclaimer.
For me, I never want a religiosity that would make me disloyal to good science. And I don't mean that in this sort of silly way that, well, how could the truth of all science would be ultimately consistent with Christianity? Because I don't mean that tepid cliche. I mean, no. These are ways, these are both ecologies of practices. There isn't a scientific method, there are scientific methods. We talked about that earlier, right? These are both ecologies of practices for ushering me into the depths of reality, or affording me, anagage, to ascend to the heights of what's ultimate in reality. And so that's what I mean. I can't be unfaithful to either one of those. What I would say is the proposal given to us by the European Enlightenment of modernity, the historically false and ethnographically false claim of an irremovable conflict between religion and science. I mean, Peter Harrison and all that work, all that great historical, that's bullshit that we should not believe anymore. And we should not let us, we have to be in either one camp or the other. That's not, there is no good argument for that claim.
So a question that I wanted to ask you is that you've gained a lot of popularity in the last few years.
I'm sort of almost famous, which is a good place to be.
Sure. And that's very well deserved, but also that comes with a lot of problems.
Yes.
And so, and particularly in your position, I think it's particularly dangerous, precisely because you're sitting in between the religious, which means you are to some degree like able to provide meaning to people or show meaning, but then also the scientific dimension, which then you can give a notion of credibility. Now, I think that credibility is credible.
You think it's earned and not pretended.
Exactly, but it's hard for people, especially if they're not scholars or very very deep into these technical things. It's very hard to judge. So the fact that you're credible but someone isn't, for the average outside person, they kind of look the same, more or less. And so you are in the almost perfect position to start a cult of some sort. And I think the biggest problem is that I haven't really researched cults very much, so I might be wrong, but my inclination is that a decent portion of these cult-like movements, the person driving it is almost swept away in its environment and how people react to them. And it's not like an act of evil from like their own minds. It's not like an act of will.
No.
And so it kind of happens to you without you realizing it.
Yes.
So my question to you is like, how are you trying to not fail prey to that? And what do you think you have been doing well to avoid that trap? And what do you think that maybe you can improve on, or maybe certain experiences in your journey where you felt that actually I did that and maybe that wasn't so good and I need to self-correct?
So a lot of things, and I've watched. I think about this almost daily. I mean, of course, a cult leader would say that. So I'm in the infinite loop of the hermeneutics of suspicion. Yeah, it matters to me. I'm concerned about it, and I don't just mean abstractly. I mean, like you say, I try to frame it as what, like you did to me. What should I be practicing? Not. No, I don't want to be a guru. No. That's, who cares? Nobody says I want to be a guru. Like, what am I practicing, right? And so one of the things that I learned by looking at others is keeping one foot in the science and one foot in the public domain. The science, by science I mean science and philosophy, right? That world keeps me accountable. That's a world where I have peers, people that can legitimately question me, challenge me, so that I don't become the only source of the evaluation of my claims or my actions. That's important. Second, I've set up organizations, first the Vervaeke Foundation and then the Lectern. And in that, the people that work with me, I wouldn't say work for me, because that's not the structure I've set up, work with me, recently just formed a partnership with Taylor Barrett and his Awaken to Meaning. The idea there is that those people have an explicit mandate and a promise from me that I will listen and respond. And I think by and large, I've kept that promise. Keeping promises are very important to me. I hate lying and I hate breaking promises like this. Like the one thing that'll really end a relationship that I have with people is if I catch them deeply lying to me or breaking a deep promise. I don't mean it for humanitarian reasons. I'm not an idiot. Like, well, I couldn't. I'm not talking about that. So they have that right contract with me. It's more than a contract to tell me when I'm going off the rails and doing things. I'll give you a concrete example where they can say, we need to make this change because if you keep going this way, you're becoming a guru for people. So for example, we shut down Voices with Vervaeke. Chris Mastropietro, who was the executive director of the Vervaeke Foundation at the time, said, no, this is turning you into a pundit. This is turning you into a guru. People are starting to base their life on what you say. You got to stop this. We're going to stop that. And we need to do a couple of things. We need to set up the lectern where you're mostly talking to peers, right? And then set up a classroom situation where you teach people. That's what the lectern is. And you don't have followers, John. You have peers and students. That's the titles, and that's how you understand. And you're a teacher and you're a colleague. Those are your titles. And like really sink your identity into those and give up the other things that are happening. Right? We did that, and I've done that. And that's a deliberate change and a deliberate practice. You'll hear me, I'll try to, sometimes I slip up, but I'll try and say my online students, not my online followers, right? My colleague, right, that I talk to, right? I even like some of the people that I look up to as heroes, like William Desmond. That's the kind of people I'm talking to now, right? So the lectern is either with colleagues who are my peers or students for whom I am their teacher, and they have the rights of a student that any good student has to any appropriate teacher. And that's how I want to, that's how things have been shifted and changed to try and, right, keep me true. And we knew that when we did that, we stopped a lot of strategies that were about just growing the channel. And Chris basically made an argument, let's shift from quantity to connection. So the rate at which the channel is growing, it's still growing, but the rate at which it's growing is much slower than it used to because we're not trying to do the broad reach. We continually ask, are we doing this because of audience capture? Or are we doing this because it follows in some theoretically justifiable way from something else that we have done that was it's already itself theoretically justifiable, theoretically motivated, or at least motivated by good practices that we're involved in. So do things like that. And then, of course, having Sarah as my spouse, who is a person of extraordinary ability. Her whole family is like this. I often joke like it's like being on Krypton. Sarah she's got a very powerful moral conscience. It's something that's very beautiful about her. She's considered one of the greatest dentists in Toronto because she explains and has compassion. She's not just a, one of the reasons I fell in love with her, I was on our date, I think it was her second date, she said, I'm a dentist because it was a way of integrating being an artist and an engineer and a therapist. And I went, oh, right? She's professional level opera singer. She's a pianist. She's a potter. She's a fully certified yoga teacher. Yeah. Like, so Sarah is very secure in herself. There is no way I will ever be able to overshadow or overpower Sarah. And she will take me down if I start doing that. And so she is very, very central. And when I say her, she's plugged in, she's Persian, so very tightly knit, extended family, also very impressive people. That she is a loving and powerful counterweight to any temptation I might have towards being a guru. So I rely on her. And it's not always a pleasant conversation when she wants to challenge me. And it doesn't mean I always just do what she says either. Sometimes I'll say, no, here's what I think is the proper, I think I'm actually exercising this pedagogical principle. And sometimes I turn out to have been right. Very frequently, she shouldn't be right. And so, yeah, people, programs, practices, constantly doing it. I mean, and I get raked over the coals. I get people who, call me a guru. And, I try to respond. I've sort of stopped for some. There was one student, he came up to me and said, I'm actually here because I'm deeply suspicious of you. And he was mentioning this other person he follows who's deeply critical of you of being a guru. And then at the end, he came up to me and he said, you're legit. It was one of the most powerful moments for me. He said, you're actually legit. And I didn't, when he said that to me, he only said it like basically the same day before he came back to me and said I was legit. He didn't say that and then I changed my behavior to try and win him over. He came to me and he said, I want to tell you something. And he said, blah, 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 blah. I was here. I went, oh, okay. And then he goes away. And then he comes back later and says, by the way, you're legit. You're not a guru. You're legit. And I went, okay. So when people show up in good faith, that's great. When people have it in their mind that I'm a guru no matter what I do or say, then, like I said, there is no defense against a Cartesian demon, right? Because they can just doubt anything you say or do. You meet them, you confront them, you do arguments, they give ground, and then you go off somewhere else, and then they attack you again, even though you've showed up in good faith. And so I have to also, I don't want to be thick-skinned, but I also have to understand that there are groups of people that are invested in labeling me as a guru because it means they don't have to interact with my thought because they can label me and dismiss. So I don't respond to people who argue by labeling me, dismissing me, or are redescribing me in trivial terms, because anybody can do trivial redescription, trivializing redescription. That's not some special superpower. That is the most inane, stupid, intellectually lazy thing you can do. Right? Don't label, don't trivialize through redescription. Just make sure you confront an argument, make sure you've understood it, and then criticize it. And people do that, and I respond to that. So I've had to be selective of what I respond to. I put a lot of thought into this, and a lot of other people, and it's a constant, again, what should I be doing? What should I be practicing? I met William Desmond. I've even said this on the public video. They say don't meet your heroes because you'll be disappointed. I was not disappointed when I met him. I want to be that for other people. People meet me. I'm not saying I'm anybody's hero, but if they meet me, I don't want them to be disappointed. They can disagree with me. That's fine. I don't want them to be disappointed in my character.
All right. So to wrap it up, I'm just going to ask you some very quick questions.
Sure.
So 1 to 2 minute answers. Just try to be as...
I'll try to be as concise as possible, which is not my want, but I'll try and constrain myself.
Just to provide a little bit of contrast, because a lot of these topics we go very deep. So now it's just an overview. So I've seen you talk a little bit about poetry from time to time, and I also have the inclination, maybe it's misguided, but I have the intuition that you've been talking about it more now compared to earlier, which is very funny to me because it reminds me of Heidegger. So what's special about poetry? Why should we care about it?
His channel, the videos I have with him. Poetry is where we transform meaning so that we can see things we couldn't see before.
Perfect. You nailed on the conciseness. Is there anything that you have changed your minds philosophically, where you used to believe it, and then at some point you look back and no, this is philosophically untenable?
Yes. I used to be a computationalist. Computational theory of mind, Jerry Fodor, language of thought. Totally, nope.
That's actually super funny to me because you mentioned Fodor in the beginning, and I didn't know that. And I was like, this is not computing.
I was a Fodorian through and through.
It's crazy.
I owe a lot to Jerry Fodor.
Right. Damn. When did he die?
He died about 3 or 4 years ago.
Did you meet him?
I met him only very briefly. I met him at a sort of extended workshop, and he was there. I got to talk to him for maybe 2 or 3 minutes. And Paul Smolensky was there. It's while the debate between Fodor and Smolensky was at its hottest, and they were like very hot towards each other, which was exciting to see. But that was, you see, that was the beginning of the like connectionism. Neural networks were the beginning of the opening of the possibility of what eventually becomes 4E-cogSci.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Who is the most underrated philosopher?
Iris Murdoch.
Good answer. And who's the most underrated scholar that's kind of contemporary?
William Desmond. I think William Desmond is going to be remembered as the person who brought back metaphysics. If I could make one person way more famous in a way that I think would do justice to them and immensely beneficial to the world, it would be William Desmond.
Last question. How can we fight self-deception?
Love wisdom. I mean, you have to have an ecology of practices motivated by love, which is calling you to transformation. The ecology are, no one practice can be a panacea, no free lunch theorem. They have to check and balance each other, and you have to pilgrimage to other ecologies. You have to love wisdom. Don't tell me what you believe. Tell me what you've practiced, and tell me where you've pilgrimed, where you've been a pilgrim.
Okay, allies. I'm gonna get one final question. A very simple one, just to wrap it up. What is God?
God is ultimate reality, primordial reality that affords us the deepest sense of realness, the wisest orientation, the most consistent and maturing transformation, and thereby enlivens all of our sense experience and our conceptual space.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for all the work you've done and all the guidance that you've provided me. This was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much, my student. I'm so glad that I responded to your email, and I'm working. We are working together. I look forward to what we're going to do, what we've already done, and what we're going to do together.
All right. Thank you so much.